Good morning, everyone. It is the 19th anniversary of a day that, for those of us who were around at the time and remember it all too well, or at least we remember waking up to it. I literally slept through it. I'd gotten home at 6:30 that morning from my third shift job. I went in my bedroom. I watched the videotape of Raw the previous night. And I had gone through and watched it. Back then it was only 2 hours. So by the time I got done with that, it was 8:30. I was going to sleep. I was also downloading something on my computer. Now, for those of you who are of a certain age, you remember this thing called dial-up internet. Well, we had that back then, and it meant my phone line was occupied. Nobody could call me. Nobody could leave a message or anything. I think I did have the voicemail where you could leave it on where it could record your voice message at the time. But I don't think I remember anybody actually leaving a message, or I may just not. Can't remember. But I went to bed about 8:30, a little bit after that. Turned the TV off. Everything else. I woke up that day about 3 o'clock. I turned on the TV, and I remember it was not on any news channel or any of the major broadcast channels. It may have been on ESPN, I don't remember. And I'm looking at it, there's a fire in the World Trade Center. And I'm thinking, they said a plane's crashed into it. And I'm thinking at the time as I wake up, there's been some, it was always one of those things I kind of always wondered about. What if a plane had crashed in one of the big skyscrapers or anything like that? But it was a clear day, from what I could tell, so it clearly wasn't weather related. Because I remember hearing years before about a bomber in World War II crashing into the Empire Building. Empire State Building, I should say, in New York City, and killing some people, obviously the people on board, as well as some people in the building. But that was overcast. I think it was at night, if I remember correctly, but it was in very bad conditions. And this, of course, was a lot bigger. So I'm listening to all this, and I'm kind of going, what the hell's going on? And my brain's a bit foggy. I'd not slept that well the day before, so I really slept what we like to call down here in the South hard. I'd slept hard. And my mom was at my sister's, because my sister was in the last month before she gave birth to my niece. And my sister had gone on to maternity leave at the time. And it's like, I'm just looking at this going, what the hell's going on? So I go onto my desktop computer, and I look through the emails. We didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, and I'm looking at the emails, and everything changes at 8:45, 8:47 around that time, when, oh crap, a plane's hit the World Trade Center. And I go on to a website, back then, I think it's still around, Fark.com, which was a website where they posted stories and you made funny comments and all of that. Well, they actually posted threads for people to comment on it several times. And all the funny stuff went away at 8:47 because it was like they were posting news about everything that was going on, and it was just insane. So, yeah, I should have called my mom, but I didn't because I was just stunned. And she comes home about, I guess, 5. I think 5 or 6 o'clock. I can't remember exactly. It was a couple hours after I woke up, and she's stunned. I'm stunned. She's talking about the Kennedy assassination, which she lived through. She was 24 at the time when that happened. I was 30 when the attacks happened, and I'm sitting there going, what the hell just happened? And obviously that night going into work, people were pissed off. People were upset, pissed off, mad as hell, because we found out why it had happened. And I know the chaos at the time when I first woke up, they were talking about everything from Serbian terrorists attacking, which didn't sound right to me. Why would they do something like that? I knew Serbia did not like the United States officially, but they wouldn't do something like this. And I don't know if, even though obviously, for those of you who remember, 6 years before, a domestic terrorist by the name of Timothy McVeigh had blown up the federal building in Oklahoma City. So I was thinking, when I first saw it, maybe it was somebody like that, but it turned out to be Osama bin Laden, who I'd known before, and I always thought that he might try something. But I was like a lot of people who followed the story at the time, thinking that he wanted to get a nuclear, biological, chemical weapon. 9/11 changed our thinking about terrorism. We didn't just think about weapons of mass destruction anymore. We thought about possibilities of low-tech possibilities. Well, low-tech in the sense of taking something that already existed, like a plane, and ramming it into a building and such. And then, there were the scares about the anthrax scares and all this. And there were actually anthrax sent out. That turned out to be not having nothing to do with Al-Qaeda or anything like that. There were copycats, as we all knew there would be. And it was a sense of vulnerability I don't think we've ever had in this country in modern times. I don't think we felt this vulnerable after Pearl Harbor. Because you got to remember, Pearl Harbor happened. There were no transatlantic planes. If there was a fleet coming, we would find out about it pretty quick, because we had naval forces, we had abilities to find out, and we would have known about it. Whether or not we would have been ready for it was another matter. Now, of course, that was then. This is now. We've lived for decades under the prospect of people launching nuclear missiles at us and only having 30 minutes to live before the nuclear bombs came down. I remember that from the 80s. But this is different. This is very different, because it meant that terrorists could strike in ways that we didn't think they would. Now, obviously, in the years since then, we've seen Al Qaeda basically decimated. ISIS has been decimated basically because they've gotten into a war they couldn't win. They know they couldn't win, and they're still a factor, but they're basically bogged down in Iraq and Syria, and that's the main focus right now. But truthfully, We haven't learned anything. We haven't learned anything. We haven't learned that there is a risk of sticking our nose in other people's business where it's not welcome. And let's go back to the main reason the United States is even involved in any way, shape, or form in the Middle East are two things: Israel and oil. And mainly oil. If it were just Israel alone, I think we would have kept them at an arm's distance. But because it's oil as well, we have to basically have Israel's back. Truth be told, if it were not because of oil, we would have told Israel to fend for yourself a long time ago. Or we would have given them arms, and we would not have, we wouldn't have the relationship we have with them. So oil has been a main focal point. And the two main oil producers in that region are Saudi Arabia and Iran. Up until 1979, the United States' best friend in the region was Iran. From the time of the coup that installed the Shah until he was deposed in 1979. We used to be enemies of the Saudis and the rest of the OPEC region. That's why we had the gas crises of the 1970s. And then things changed. Things changed when the Iranian Revolution took place. And Saudi Arabia saw an opportunity to get in good with the United States government, especially when they knew that Ronald Reagan was coming in. And this is, a lot of people say, why are you going back this far? It has nothing to do with terrorism. Oh, terrorism has been around a lot longer than 9/11, folks. Munich, 1972, does that ring a bell? Yes, folks, it's been around that long, if longer than that. But it never struck here. Why? Because nobody had the balls to do it. They knew we had nukes. They knew we had a huge military. And up until that point, the terrorist groups didn't want to attack the United States directly because they didn't know just how far we would go. Al-Qaeda did it because they didn't care. They wanted a war. They wanted a war with us. Now, here is the thing that a lot of folks don't understand about Al-Qaeda. They know exactly what they were doing. They knew we would come for them. They knew that we would send troops into Afghanistan. They wanted a war. Because in their mind, they wanted this to be the next Vietnam. They wanted this to be the thing that tore America apart, just like Vietnam had torn apart the United States up until the time we left. It's easy to assume that this was some grand plan, but it was really, it was a plan, but it wasn't this huge, gigantic, overscaping plan. Osama bin Laden knew that if he could provoke us, there's a big difference between what Japan did to us and what he did to us. Because first of all, Al-Qaeda is not a nation. They don't have a gigantic military you can see, you can find intelligence about, that you can bomb the hell out of. They don't have, in World War II, we went after the military and industrial production. So we knew where we were going, roughly. We found out where in Japan we needed to go to attack their ability to make war, and we did. It took us nearly over 3.5 years to finish the job, but we got the job done. And that was from a somewhat rolling start. But here's the deal. Japan really didn't want a war with the United States. They just wanted to show the United States to basically don't attack us because we can do this to you. The naval admiral who planned the attacks said that it was a huge mistake, but he was ordered by his superiors to plan the attack, and he did it, and it was successful, and it got us into the war, and we eventually won it. Osama bin Laden was not the leader of any nation. He was the leader of a movement, a terrorist movement, that went across borders, that had no huge armies you could spot from space. Terrorism is a guerrilla war, except it's a lot larger. It's a lot harder to fight a guerrilla war because you don't know where the enemy is. They could be anywhere. They know the risk they take, and they're willing, in some cases they're willing to die for it, they're willing to take themselves out if they take you out. Talk to a lot of our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan who know all about improvised explosive devices and ambushes. A lot of those same tactics were used in Vietnam. But except there was a organized army. But there was also a terrorist group, essentially called Viet Cong, who were supported by the North Vietnamese. But they were essentially an armed, organized terrorist group. Al-Qaeda was never quite that organized. But they were trying to be. But they didn't have a whole lot of friends in the Arab region. They had some, but not organized governments, because those governments did not want to provoke us. Do you think Iran was going to give help to Al-Qaeda, knowing that if they were found out that the United States might come calling? They may have been sympathetic to a degree. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. But they weren't going to go out of their way to help Al-Qaeda. Neither was Saddam Hussein. If you have done your research, you will have known Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were not friends. And Osama bin Laden would have loved nothing more than to have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein and put somebody else in charge. That felt like... Because Saddam Hussein was more of a secular ruler, and Osama bin Laden was a theocratical ruler. That's a big difference. Saddam Hussein only used Islam when it befitted him politically. Now, in the days and weeks after 9/11, we went into Afghanistan with our forces and started a war that still exists to this day. It's lasted a lot longer than the Soviets in Afghanistan, and it could be argued we've accomplished more than the Soviets did. The problem is we've talked about leaving, but we don't want to leave, and we've fallen for the trap. The message should have been, go in, kick some ass, put our allies in charge, and leave a message to the Taliban: you ever raise your hand against us again, we'll come back and finish the job. A lot harder. But we should have left, knowing that we probably would have to go back again soon. We didn't have to leave necessarily in 6 months, but it should have been within a year. Because we'd really wiped them out by the end of the year 2001. We'd really done a damn good job. But the problem is the Taliban themselves, having fought a guerrilla war, knew all too well how to deal with having to fight at a disadvantage, fighting ambushes, fighting with ambushes and IEDs and with guerrilla tactics. You know how a lot of those tactics came about? Our own revolution. We didn't have IEDs or ambushes, but IEDs obviously, but we had ambushes. A lot of guerrilla warfare, modern thinking about guerrilla warfare, came from our revolution. Now, truth be told, some of the tactics had been around for a long time before that. They just weren't as successful as our revolution. And yes, we did have an organized revolutionary army, but in a lot of ways, guerrilla tactics were found to have worked in our revolution. Up until that point, the overriding belief was that they could be crushed. It would be costly, but they could be crushed. In the Revolutionary War, that didn't happen. We won the day. Now the army won the war, but the guerrilla warfare that we did wore down the British to the point where they realized just how much it was going to cost them to keep us under their thumb. It was a war of attrition, to where the British found out that they didn't want to pay the price anymore. Now, and it's a real stretch to go that far. And I'm not saying for any second we should blame ourselves for 9/11. It's the circumstance of history. Okay? The circumstance of history. We used to be an ally of Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, of all places. When the Soviets invaded, guess who we befriended? People like Osama bin Laden. We were helping them to rid Afghanistan of the Soviets. Because if the Soviets got a foothold in Afghanistan, that meant they could get Pakistan, that meant they might be able to get it in India, and that would have been massively, massively destabilizing. That was their plan. If they could have successfully subsumed Afghanistan, they could go after Pakistan next. Iran was their ally, in a sense, but they could have gone after Pakistan, or convinced Pakistan to become their ally, and if that became the case, India would be next. And India wasn't as economically developed as they are now. All that changed 30 years ago, last month, when Saddam Hussein made the mistake of invading Kuwait. Now, depending on who you hear, there was either a miscommunication that Saddam Hussein allegedly told somebody in the Bush administration that this was what they were going to do, and then he asked if they would have an objection to it. Now, I think that's been more of a myth than anything else. I think that Saddam Hussein used that as an excuse to invade Kuwait and used it as an excuse to go, well, the Bush administration said it'd be okay, when in fact they probably didn't say it was okay. So, Iraq invades Kuwait. Saudi Arabia freaks out because they don't know if Saddam Hussein has eyes for them. Iran is staying out of it because they'd just gotten out of a war 2 years before with Saudi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia, I'm sorry, but with Iraq. And this was more of Iraq versus Saudi Arabia, and Iran was staying out of it, but they were kind of rooting for the Iraqis, even though they hated the Iraqis, because they hated the Saudis even more. Okay? So, Saudi Arabia wanted our troops to come there to help them out. Makes sense. You don't want Saudi Arabia to fall to Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein would have a massive oil resources, more than he already had, under his thumb. So George Bush, the first one, not the second one, sent troops over there. There was a lot of support for this. There was obviously people who didn't like it. I was skeptical, but I understood why he was doing it. I supported it cautiously. Well, we went to war. We won, I think it was 100 days or so. We had the air war was the bulk of it, and I think that the ground war only took 100 hours? Something like that, maybe not even that long. It was relatively quick. It was great military planning. And we won the day, but we knew we'd have to stay there for a bit to settle things down, but we kept Saddam Hussein in power because Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the other Arab states knew that if Saddam Hussein was deposed, it could destabilize the region. They wanted him kept in power, but he would be greatly weakened to where he could keep control in his country, but he couldn't threaten anybody else. And the sanctions would, and the flyovers and all this would keep him in check, which for the most part it did. The problem with that war is it angered people like Osama bin Laden. And it turned him into our enemy. Now you're saying to yourself, well, you're blaming us for that war? No. It's a circumstance of history. If we hadn't gone to Saudi Arabia to free Kuwait, chances are Saddam Hussein, in time, maybe in a few months, maybe in a few years, maybe a lot longer than that, he would have invaded Saudi Arabia and taken great chunks of it. He didn't have to invade the whole country, just the oil fields. He didn't have to invade it all at one time. He could take a bunch of the oil fields, and if we weren't going to get involved with Kuwait, how in the world would we invade Saudi Arabia? And then, because you see, Saddam Hussein wanted his own empire. His vision was take Kuwait, then take Saudi Arabia, then eventually get revenge for basically the stalemate. He didn't lose the Iran-Iraq war. It was basically a stalemate. They fought to a stalemate. He wanted to get back at Iran. And in time, after some time of learning how to control the Saudi Arabian population, he would have went after Iran. And he would have had his own empire fueled by a lot of oil. He would have been one of the most powerful men on the planet. So that was the reason why we went in there, to keep him from that possible plan. Now, I'm not saying that was going to be his plan, but that if I were in his shoes, that was how I would have done it. The consequence of history. Meaning you could do something good and still get bad results. That's this case. 9/11 happened because Osama bin Laden got mad at us for being in Kuwait, being in Saudi Arabia, to invade Kuwait to take it back from Saddam Hussein. That's what happened. That's how Al-Qaeda became born. That's why we had the first attack on the World Trade Centers. If you remember, 1993, somebody drove a truck bomb into the World Trade Center. I don't remember if it was a north or south tower. Blew it up, killed a bunch of people, but the tower stood. It was bad, but not what it became 8 years later. So, have we learned anything from 9/11? No, not really. We have stuck our nose in Iraq. We're still in Iraq. We fought a war against Iraq. Here's the thing. We were told by the Bush administration that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That Saddam Hussein was actively producing weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The problem was our allies were not getting the same intelligence. They had their own intelligence sources, and they were being told, no, there's no weapons of mass destruction here. It all goes back to before 9/11. There were people within the Bush administration, specifically Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, who wanted eventually to go after Iraq. That is a known fact. George W. Bush probably didn't really want that war. But truth be told, there were people in the Republican Party who did. George W. Bush was brought along with it because Saddam Hussein threatened his father. Now, whether or not Saddam Hussein actually planned on killing George Bush Sr., who knows? It may have been one of those things that I don't like that guy, I'm going to kill him, But it was a hook. And the main reason for it? Oil. If the United States had a friendly government in Iraq, and they had an ally in Saudi Arabia, their goal was to eventually topple the Iranian regime, to where the United States could have essentially control through allies of the world's oil supply. So that's the reason why we went into Iraq. Not because of weapons of mass destruction. That was the excuse. To this day, there has not been found any weapons of mass destruction anywhere close to what was told to us before the war. The only thing that I can remember being found out was a bunch of sarin gas shells that were inert because they'd basically gone out of date. And you could have fired them at somebody and it would have hurt the people. The only thing that would have hurt them would have been the shells falling from the sky. And the shrapnel would have killed some people, obviously, but the sarin gas wouldn't hurt anybody because it would become inert. Did Saddam want chemical weapons? Of course. He knew, though, that if he did that, if he tried it, we would come for him. The problem was we came for him anyway, even though he didn't plan on doing it because he wanted to keep control. So we fought a war in Iraq that killed over 4,000 of our soldiers, and we're still there. We're still there nearly 18 years later. And it's a known fact that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. Yes, he celebrated. Yes, he was happy about it. Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Although Osama bin Laden was not the friend of Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein didn't like Osama bin Laden. But hey, if you strike the guys that we really hate, I'll cheer you on one time. That's what he was thinking. So what did we not learn? In those few weeks after 9/11, we all came together, for the most part. But we made the mistake of thinking this was all Muslims. Every Muslim wanted to get us. It brought a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment. The problem was, and that is exactly what people like Osama bin Laden want. He wants you to hate Muslims because it means the Muslims will turn to him, in his mind, and they can have his holy war. That's what he wanted, a holy war. The great power of Islam against the great power of Christendom. That's what he wanted. Without realizing, for us realizing, that most Muslims don't like Osama bin Laden in that region. They didn't care for us anyway. They just wanted to be left alone. They didn't like most. If you go over to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, other Muslim countries, they don't like us. They don't want to see us destroyed. They don't really care for us. Most people, they just want us to leave them alone. They don't want anything bad to happen to us, but they don't want us to be destroyed either. In some cases, they don't want us to be destroyed because that means Russia and China would intervene, and that would be a whole lot worse because, at least with us, we believe in freedom and democracy. With Russia and China, they would think nothing of conquering. At least in their minds, in the minds of the Muslims. So they don't like us, but they understand that we are not coming to destroy them. Like, if we went away, Russia and China would be the world powers, and that would be bad. The thing we didn't realize is that this is a long game. Osama bin Laden wants to see America destroyed. And he never said anything about him being the one who destroyed it. He wanted it destroyed. What better way to destroy it than to stir up discontent, to stir up disruption, to give people, the enemies of America, the opportunity to get in and create divisions. What are we seeing today? Iran is interfering in our elections. Russia's interfering in our election. China's interfering in our election. It's a known fact those three nations are doing it. Why? Because Iran sees us as an enemy. Russia, because they want to regain the status they once had as the Soviet Union and eventually dominate Europe. That's what Putin wants to do, is to basically dominate Europe, either directly by invading them or more than likely through fear. China wants to dominate Asia and the subcontinent, and possibly even as far as Afghanistan. The thing we have not learned is that we are stuck as world leaders. We can't just think of America first. We have stuck our nose in the business of the world. We call ourselves the world's lone superpower, when in fact that's not the case anymore. We're one of three: the United States, Russia, and China. Russia and China want to take us out so they can decide what they want to do with the world. That's the real competition. Don't ever let anybody tell you Russia and China are buddy-buddy. They're not. They weren't during the Soviet Union days. They're not right now. It's all about power. The real battle's between the Chinese president and the Russian president. And we have to be the ones to keep both those nations from dominating. And what have we done? We've let them do it. This isn't just Trump's fault. Obama had his issues. There are things I disagree with Obama about, the way we dealt with China and Russia and the Middle East and other things. You see, this is the thing. After World War II, we founded the United Nations. We helped to found the United Nations. We are basically the linchpin on keeping freedom in the world. Okay? Europe, parts of South America, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, to an extent India. We have to be the force to preserve freedom and democracy. The problem is, especially folks like Trump, they're tiring of it. They don't want to have to think about Europe and Japan and South Korea and places like that. Well, if we just backed away from South Korea, what happens? North Korea invades it. And China and North Korea, being allies, start looking at Japan. Maybe not next year, maybe not in a decade, but somewhere down the road, they're going to decide we can take Japan. Because if the United States isn't going to protect Japan, either Japan has to build up and fight a war that would wreck the global economy, because we are globally interconnected. That is why we have a military presence in China, in Japan, and in South Korea, to prevent that from happening. It ain't about communism. China is not a communist country anymore, except politically. They're one of the more. You could argue they're more capitalist than we are. They're communist in name only. The political system is still there. The economic system went away a long time ago, to an extent. There's only one true communist country left, and that's North Korea. Cuba is, you could argue that they still are, but they're like China. So here's the thing about 9/11. It's the price we paid for being a world leader. For over 50 years since the end of World War II, we had gotten away with not having anybody attack the United States directly. And we had intervened in so many countries because we were fighting the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And then after the Cold War, we wanted to preserve our superpower status. We wanted to keep China in check. We wanted to make sure that nobody got as powerful as we are. That meant continuing our mission in Iraq, a mission in Saudi Arabia to keep Iraq in check, and also to a certain extent Iran. It's the price we paid for being a world leader. That is why 9/11 happened. And people don't realize that it could happen again. And there are people right now who actively want it to happen again. They're just not Muslims. They're not just terrorists. They're people like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. They would love to see another 9/11 because they see us as vulnerable right now. For the first time in modern American history, we're vulnerable. For the first time since the 1960s and 70s, we have massive social upheaval. And it's probably most likely the Russians are playing both sides against the middle. It would not surprise me one bit if Russia's trying to attack both Biden and Trump. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if China's doing the same damn thing. Pitting both sides against the middle. They want disruption. They want us to be at each other's throats because it benefits them. See what I'm getting at? It's all about dividing us. And Osama bin Laden has been dead for almost 10 years now. And he's laughing in his grave. This is getting exactly what he wanted. Division. Divide and conquer. United we stand, divided we fall. Well, guess what? We're not united anymore. We could still be if we had proper leadership. But we have a leader in power that's very selfish, and that may or may not be under the direct influence of Vladimir Putin, depending on what you believe. But even if he's not, Putin's getting what he wants. Xi Jinping's getting what he wants. And Osama bin Laden's getting what he wants from beyond the grave. It's all about bringing us down. It's all about creating divisions. Having one side think they're the real patriots, having another side thinking they're the real patriots. And the truth of the matter is, it's division. And they've mastered the whole aspect of division. It's counterintelligence, people. Counterintelligence. It's the oldest game in the book. I can sit here and talk to you for days on end. And the thing is, we're still not going to learn. Because you've got people who either want us to get away from the world and bring all our foreign spending back in and spend it here in the United States without realizing we can't do that. We're too far gone. The world's interconnected, and we have a role to play in the world. We can't get away from that, because if we stop playing that role, then Russia and China will divide up the world. Maybe not militarily, but through economic pressure, through political pressure. Russia will find ways to rebuild their old Eastern Bloc. China will try and dominate Asia and probably go after Africa, maybe even try and get into inroads into South America, and then Russia will be forced to do the same thing, and the next thing you know, the Cold War will be between them, and we're going to be stuck here at home thinking, well, we're greater than we actually are. You can complain all you want to about foreign aid, but the problem is foreign aid helps keep the world free. Or at least parts of it. You do a whole lot more. And that's the lesson we didn't learn, is that we have to be willing to pay the price to promote freedom and to promote democracy. If we can't do that, if we can't be a world leader, then what are we going to become? We can't be an isolationist again. We have a global economy. Even if Donald Trump tomorrow says we're going to bring all the manufacturing or create all the manufacturing, it would take years to do that. Years. At best. "9/11 will always live in my memory. But I'm not like a lot of folks. I didn't watch it live. I didn't feel it live. But I understood the factors. I'm old enough to remember the hostage crisis with Iran back in 1979 through 81. I remember when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. And that Reagan sent Marines into Beirut to help ease the situation. And unfortunately, there was a bombing there that killed 253 Marines. That's almost 40 years ago, man. And I remember the Sunday morning waking up, turning on CBS This Morning, and Charles Kuralt's there talking about the bombing. That was a punch in the face in a fight that we were winning pretty well. But we don't want to conquer. We just want to help promote freedom and democracy. But we're not seen as being a liberating force by some of these people. We're seen as occupiers. And that's the thing about Osama bin Laden. He was able to convince people that even though we were in Saudi Arabia by the permission of the Saudi government's not even popular in Saudi Arabia. To them, Saudi Arabia is holy land. And for us to continue this fight, we have to be willing to pay the price. 9/11 was the price. You want to be leaders of the world? You have to be willing to pay the price. Can we pay the price? We have no choice. We have no more choice. Because the problem is, we're playing a game that we don't know how to win. And that's the crux of it. We're playing a game that we're not sure how to win. In 9/11, we took a loss in that game. Where up until that point, we'd done pretty damn well. And we'd still been dominant in the game. It's just now our enemies have found ways to get in. Not through blunt military force or anything like that, but through subversion. This isn't anything new. It's a well-known fact that during the entire Cold War, Russia and China tried to foment the very same thing. The biggest difference is they had to actually be in the United States to do it. They had to send agents over here to the United States to do it. And I'm sure there are Russian, Chinese agents here in the United States doing the very same thing they were doing back during the Cold War. It's just now the internet and social media makes it a whole lot easier. Some folks can sit in Moscow or Beijing, get on Facebook, and send away a bunch of memes and create a bunch of havoc that way. They know how to play us because they've been trained how to play us. These are people who know everything about counterintelligence, counterintelligence, and all of this. They're playing CIA games. And that's why they're winning. That's why they're winning right now. Doesn't mean they'll win eventually. But right now they're winning. Because we aren't willing to pay the price to beat them. Because we think that if we just think about ourselves first, that everything will be fine. And it's not. This isn't 1918 or 1919 again, when we could walk away from the world after World War I. We saw what happened there. The rise of fascism in Europe brought the world to war again within 20 years after World War I. The reason we didn't have a World War III yet is that we were involved in keeping the peace. We had a Cold War with Russia that never got hot, never truly got hot. There were more than a few occasions where it could have, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we managed to keep the peace. On this day, where 19 years ago we lost 3,000 plus people, we realized how vulnerable we really are. But more importantly, our enemies realized how vulnerable we really are. The myth is we all came together after 9/11. The truth is, many of us did. Some didn't. Some went after Muslims and attacked, or even people who looked Muslim. They went after Sikhs. They went after Hindus. They went after anybody that looked different, that might look like a Muslim, even though they're not Muslim. Osama bin Laden's goal was to divide and to conquer America. He knew we probably wasn't going to live to see it happen. And of course, almost a decade after 9/11, we took him out. The problem is that we still didn't learn the lesson. Of how to deal with the chess game of global politics. We're playing chess while our enemies are playing 3D chess like Spock did back in Star Trek. And our enemies may not be united, may in fact hate each other, but they know that they want to get their way, they got to take us down. In many ways that unites them. What 9/11 did was realize that we are vulnerable. We never learned how to deal with that vulnerability. We thought that sacrificing some privacy would do it, and to a certain degree it helped protect us to some degree. But it meant that we were suspecting each other. We were always looking over our shoulders. Even myself. Do you know what my greatest fear was after 9/11? A bunch of terrorists getting together, going into shopping malls and Walmarts on Black Friday and creating chaos by blowing up bombs or shooting up people, and the massive stampedes would kill more people than the actual attacks themselves, to sow that chaos. But they didn't have to. Why? Because they got what they wanted to begin with. They got what they wanted to begin with. And that was the key. We'll always remember 9/11. But in the years to come, it'll become like Pearl Harbor did. It'll become just another day, where an older generation will remember it. Younger generations will just see it as just a historical day. An interesting fact, like the Kennedy assassination. Just another day. Interesting, but not particularly special. That's going to come. It always does. The people of my mom's generation remembered 9/11, or remembered the Kennedy assassination because they lived it. Those of us of my generation remember 9/11 because we lived it. Those of my nieces, she understands it. But what of people of her age? What of those who came after her? that were born in the years afterwards. With the next generations coming up in the next 20, 40 years, it'll become just another day, as December 7th has, as November 20th, I think 22nd, wasn't it? Where Kennedy was assassinated. That's what we got to be careful of. Complacency. Right now we're living through the coronavirus. We're going to always remember when, on that March evening, when we found out the NBA was shutting down and everything else was shutting down, and life completely changed forever. The question is, can we get back to what was once normal? It'll never be like it once was. We need to accept that. Many of us didn't accept it after 9/11. Yeah, we put up with the screenings at the airport and all this, but that was because an enemy that we could see and kill was attacking us, not this. This is something we can't see. I'm currently in a job right now where once this goes away, my job goes away. I'm kind of in a rock and a hard place sort of thing. Yes, I got a nice job that pays really well, but it's because of the coronavirus. I want to find another job because I know this job ain't going to be permanent. My biggest fear is that it will become permanent. And that every day, no matter what the workplace is, you're going to have somebody as a screening associate scanning you to see if you've got a fever or anything that could mean that you're sick and that you might have the coronavirus or whatever else comes down the line. Before I let you go, I'm going to talk about conspiracy theories. That night, the night of 9/11, I remember having a conversation with someone at work, and I told them, I guarantee you, very soon there's going to be 9/11 conspiracy theories. And he scoffed at it. Well, look at where we're at now. There's a bunch of them. I've often wondered if these conspiracy theories just sprung out of thin air, or in some cases were presented by people who wanted to create division. I try not to get into the conspiracy bent, but sometimes I can't help it. I honestly believe that the Soviet Union promoted, to an extent, conspiracy theories about Kennedy's assassination for no other reason than to create division in the United States, and that's all they really needed to do. There was no gigantic plan. They just wanted to create chaos, to weaken us. And I think the very same thing's going on right now with the coronavirus. There have been reports that Russia and China were sending us misinformation that was feeding into the conspiracy theory. And I think, in a very strange way, the very people that proclaim themselves patriots and are the ones who are doing the work of our enemies, and they don't even realize it. So on this day when we should be unified, where are we at? We're nowhere close to it. We didn't learn the lessons. Regardless of what we think about one another, regardless of our differences, we're Americans. We should be together. We should see that we have a role to play in the world. We can't shirk that responsibility. Yet, some on the left and some on the right want to get away from that. We can't do that. If we fail, then the world goes straight to hell. Thank you for your time. God bless those who passed away on that very sad day. God bless their survivors. Good night.